Open the podcast bay doors, Hal.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 184 of Welcome to Geektown. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. I've been a proud geek all my life, being into role-playing games, board games, sci-fi, fantasy, and especially superheroes and comics. And I want to help others join me in those pursuits, but I found that sometimes people can get overwhelmed or feel left out because they don't already have what some consider the requisite knowledge to be considered a fan. And that's where Welcome to Geektown comes in. Here you can ask your questions without feeling like a gatekeeper is calling you out for not yet being fully versed in every aspect of your new interest. I got quite a few new listeners for my Doctor Doom and Iron Man connection episode. I hope some of you have stuck around, even though there won't be any theory crafting this time. Instead, we're continuing the recurring feature started way back in episode 87, although you don't have to listen to all the past ones to understand what's going on, as we go through the X-Men chronologically to discuss each of those members who aren't as well known as their more popular counterparts. Thanks again to Jesse C., who asked the question that inspired this feature. We're still in the early 2000s at this point, and I have to break my chronological rule here a little bit, as there are two characters so intertwined that I have to discuss them together, even though they joined the team at different times. Let's talk about Zorn and Xorn, spelled with an X and a Z respectively. The odd thing is that this is a character that wouldn't exist if the original writer had their way, but instead there are basically two of them. The first Zorn we're introduced to is in New X-Men Annual from 2001, the only annual published for that title, written by Grant Morrison with art by Leniel Francis Yu, where Cyclops, Wolverine, and Emma Frost rescue him from captivity by a corrupt Chinese official named John Sublime. Cyclops intervenes as Zorn was apparently about to commit suicide by turning the sun inside of his head into a black hole in a way that would have destroyed the planet. In talking Zorn out of this, he instead is recruited onto the X-Men themselves. We next see Zorn in New X-Men number 122, by Grant Morrison and artist Frank Quitely, who actually gets co-creator credit rather than Yu, where he is recovering from his ordeal at a Chinese monastery and is brought to use his healing powers to fix the damage to Professor X done by Cassandra Nova. In addition to his healing abilities, the black hole/sun inside of Zorn's head also gives him electromagnetic manipulation, gravity manipulation, which includes the ability to create wormholes to teleport people, and telepathy, although some of these powers we don't see until later. And it's important that we don't, because originally Zorn was a fiction. Zorn was given a teaching position at the Xavier Institute, assigned to the special class, the outcasts of the school. He begins teaching them more and more radical ideas, and in New X-Men number 146, he takes off his helmet to reveal that he is actually Magneto, who had been thought dead since the destruction of Genosha at the beginning of Morrison and Quitely's run on the book. His healing of Professor X had simply been a fusing of the nano-sentinels inside Xavier's spine, and when he undid that, it left the professor once again paralyzed. He took his special students and tried to create a new brotherhood of evil mutants. But the young mutants preferred the more peaceful Zorn to this drug-fueled dictator. A drug called Kick was pushing his powers to a new level, but also affecting his personality. At the end of this story, Magneto ends up killing Jean Grey, but then is killed himself by Wolverine. And if you asked Grant Morrison, they would tell you this is the end of that story, and that Zorn was always Magneto. And a careful reading of that run provides clues that this twist had been the plan from the beginning. However, once Grant left the title, the higher-ups at Marvel wanted to bring back both Xorn and Magneto as characters in the book, and so the writer of Uncanny X-Men, Chuck Austen, was assigned to write a story that could explain their return. Instead of bringing the original Zorn/Magneto back to life, it was revealed that Zorn was a separate entity who had been pretending to be Magneto under the manipulation of John Sublime, now revealed to be a sentient virus simply called Sublime using a host body. Sublime wanted to use the face of the most famous evil mutant to convince humanity that mutants needed to be eliminated. We learn this from Zorn's twin brother, Shen Zorn. The original is now retconned to have a full name of Kuan Yin Zorn, who has basically the identical powers, albeit with a black hole rather than a sun in his brain, which he could use to suck people in and transport them to Mojo World, as well as having the original peaceful attitude of the Zorn first seen in New X-Men. Meanwhile, over in Excalibur, Magneto was found alive and well. Shen was discovered by the X-Men in issue number 157 of Uncanny X-Men and officially joins the team in issue 162, changing the English spelling of his name to differentiate himself from his twin. As for how Kuan Yin Zorn had taken on Magneto's appearance, this was explained in a Marvel handbook rather than a regular story in the comics, that Scarlet Witch's growing madness, which eventually led to the House of M storyline, had caused her to unknowingly make this transformation, and that she had been playing with the world for quite some time before her final breakdown. This also was the explanation given for how her father had actually returned to life by Doctor Strange in House of M number 7. Sometime later, Kuan Yin's consciousness reawoke as part of the giant ball of mutant energy seen in the New Avengers after House of M. Since energy can neither be created nor destroyed, according to the second law of thermodynamics, the powers of all the mutants who had been depowered had somehow collected together and inhabited the body of a man named Michael Pointer. As Kuan Yin had been a mostly psychic presence in his original form, he was able to become the primary personality in this mix of consciousnesses. He went to Genosha and called out Magneto to allow his energy to take over Magneto's body, who at the time was one of the powerless mutants, wanting to complete his original plans, this time with the actual Magneto involved. The New Avengers were able to prevent this, and in the end, the Sentry was able to take the ball of energy and throw it into the sun. In the meantime, Shen was also originally depowered from Scarlet Witch's "No More Mutants" declaration, but apparently got his powers back at some point, as he is next seen as the target of a group called the Dark Riders, who are trying to kill all mutant healers. He was easily able to defeat the group, and later was called on by Magneto himself for some much-needed healing. Zorn was mind-controlled during the Secret Empire storyline by Emma Frost, and made the face of a mutant land on the west coast of the US called New Tian, as part of Emma's dealings with the evil version of Steve Rogers. When that fell apart, he disappeared for a time, but eventually became part of the X-Men once again, and ended up using his black hole to defeat Bastion for good, but at the cost of his own life. With the invention of mutant resurrection during the Krakoan age of the X-Men, both Zorns were returned to life, with Kuan Yin being freed of Sublime's influence. The pair were recruited by Legion to be a failsafe in case he ever lost control of his massive powers, and helped Legion root out a returned Onslaught in the miniseries Way of X. Although Shen hasn't been seen since the Hellfire Gala massacre, Kuan Yin was one of the survivors and is currently a supporting character in the latest run of X-Men. Currently written by Jed MacKay with art by Ryan Stegman as of this recording. While he doesn't join the team on field missions at the moment, his mutant healing powers are very appreciated when the team returns from their various outings. Our next X-Men recruit is another character whose body was massively changed when his mutant powers activated. Jonathan Starsmore, or Jono to his friends, was a wellspring of psionic energy which exploded out when it first manifested, destroying much of the young man's chest and lower part of his face, leaving a furnace of fiery energy in its place. The young Brit is able to speak telepathically and emits blasts of psionic energy. Taking the name Chamber, he was quickly recruited to join the latest class of mutants at Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters in the Generation X title, created shortly after My Generation was named such. When that book ended with issue 75, he was offered a place on the X-Men team, but turned it down, instead going back to London and hooking up with a pop singer named Sugar Cane. Cane spelled Kane. When a tabloid printed a fake story about Sugar being pregnant with Jono's baby, anti-mutant activists abducted her. Although it turned out the whole thing was faked, as Sugar's manager was trying to get her more publicity. Jono and Sugar broke up, and he accepted a new invitation to join the X-Men. He pretended to have a falling out with the team shortly thereafter in order to infiltrate Weapon X. But the government program was successful in actually brainwashing him, and he disappeared shortly after his mission to assassinate John Sublime. Jonathan was one of the many victims of Scarlet Witch at the end of House of M, and when he was depowered, he nearly lost his life, due to much of his body being missing and no longer powered by the psionic energy that had kept him going up until this point. Fortunately, Beast was somehow able to find and save him in time, although he was left at a hospital hooked up to multiple machines, keeping him barely alive. After being transferred to a London hospital, he was abducted and rejuvenated by the Clan Akaba, descendants of Apocalypse, who, it turns out, Jono was also related to. Given transfusions of Apocalypse's blood, Jono's body reformed, albeit with Apocalypse's gray skin pigment. He showed no active powers, but a scan revealed him to be a latent Omega-level mutant. He rejected the clan as well as Excalibur, who also tried to recruit him to their team, stating that he wanted nothing more than to be left alone. However, he soon went back on this, becoming one of the new warriors in the 4th volume of that series. I mentioned him briefly in my discussion of that team in episode 175, taking on the name Decibel, using technology to create solid sound constructs. When that team ended, he returned to the mutant fold at the island nation of Utopia. There's a storyline called Age of X, where Legion remade the world so that he would be seen as a hero. In this alternate history, Jono's old powers were returned, and he lost his gray skin. I haven't mentioned this story in other characters' histories, because for them, any changes that happened to them were undone by the end. But Jono's change stuck, even after Legion was convinced to restore the original timeline. He rejoined the X-Men as a teacher, helping other students who had gone through massive physical changes from their mutant awakening. Around that time, he was also briefly romantically involved with Jubilee, who was also one of the founding members of Generation X. When Jubilee apparently died, yes, of course, she gets better later, Chamber decided to join the Morlocks, an underground society of mutants unable to hide their mutations and blend in with the rest of the world. When the Marauders attacked the Morlocks, Jonathan was killed, but has since returned thanks to the mutant resurrection protocols of Krakoa. Chamber survived the Hellfire Gala massacre and was last seen briefly in X-Men Forever number 3, fighting against Orcus, but has not been added to any of the teams in the new From the Ashes X-Men titles. But he's well known enough among comic book readers that I have no doubt we'll be seeing him again sooner rather than later. Although that feels more like 2 entries, I really covered 3 characters in this episode. And to keep this in my usual 15 to 20 minute range, I'll be stopping here and moving on to other lesser known X-Men next time, including another new warrior and 2 of the extreme X-Men. But of course, if you have other topics you want me to cover before this iteration of Welcome to Geektown comes to an end, I'm still open to those. You can send them or just general feedback on this show via email to welcome2geektown@gmail.com. Or you can go to the website, welcome to, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com, and click the Submit a Question link if you'd prefer to remain anonymous. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcome-to-geektown, Twitter @geektownpodcast, Mastodon @welcome-to-geektown @mastodon.social, or Blue Sky @welcome-to-geektown.bluesky.social. Also, if you'd like to support the show directly, why not become a patron at patreon.com/welcome-to-geektown for just $1 per month to get access to full scripts of the shows, audio outtakes, and a monthly shoutout. You can also help the show grow by subscribing and giving a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts to join the Geektown City Council, which helps other people find the show, so we can all tell them, welcome to Geektown, population, us. Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Lovitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All other sound clips are the copyrighted material of their respective owners, and no infringement is intended, falling under fair use.